courtroom was dead silent. Karen Lander, HOA president and self-proclaimed ruler of Longwood Estates, was about to explode. She was shaking, her face bright red as she pointed a finger at the judge, her voice shrieking, "This is a disgrace!" But the judge, calm and unwavering, didn't flinch. Instead, he held up one piece of paper, the HOA's death sentence. The room gasped. Karen's empire was crumbling, and she had no idea what was coming next. The judge's next words would send her world into freefall. But what came next wasn't just justice. It was something much worse for her. You won't believe what happened after that. Karen Lander wasn't just the HOA president. She was the self-appointed queen of Longwood Estates. With her perfectly coiffed hair and power suit, she had a way of making you feel like you didn't belong the moment you stepped into her territory. I should have known when I first moved in that her fake smiles and sugary sweet greetings were just a mask for something far darker. It was all about control, and when she saw that my house wasn't part of her HOA's little kingdom, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Her first move was subtle, a little invoice for dues that I wasn't even responsible for. I thought it was a mistake, but Karen wasn't the type to make mistakes. She was the type to make you pay. I thought ignoring it would be enough, but I was wrong. Her next visit was personal. Standing on my doorstep, her icy blue eyes drilling into me, she laid out her rules, her voice dripping with false sweetness. When I told her no, that we weren't part of her HOA, that's when her true colors showed. Her smile vanished, replaced by something far colder, far more calculating. "You're going to regret that," she said, her tone low and menacing. And just like that, I knew I was in her crosshairs. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. It was a perfect Tuesday when everything started. Garbage day. Small victories like remembering to take the bins out before the truck came were the little wins I cherished. My wife Gina and I had just settled into our dream home, a modest ranch on the outskirts of Longwood Estates. The best part? It wasn't part of the HOA. We weren't bound by their rules or their dues. Our driveway was the last one before the fancy stone entrance to the subdivision, and the property line ended right at our gate. No HOA, no restrictions, just peace and quiet. We'd done our homework before buying the place, checking the county plat maps over and over to make sure our property was completely separate from the HOA's jurisdiction. It was perfect. We could let Buster, our dog, run free in the yard without the HOA patrolling our every move. No one to complain if my garbage cans were a couple of feet too close to the sidewalk, or if my lawn wasn't perfectly manicured. It was freedom. But then came the mail. Gina brought it in that afternoon, sorting through the usual bills and junk. She handed me a fancy cream-colored envelope. Longwood Estates Homeowners Association. I laughed, thinking it was just a welcome packet. But inside was a bill, quarterly dues, $300. New resident welcome fee, $150. Total, $450. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the mistake. "There's no way," I muttered. "We weren't even in the HOA." Gina agreed. "Must be a mix-up. We're not even part of it." But that's when the first warning bell went off in my head. It wasn't just a mistake. They weren't asking for a voluntary donation. They were demanding money, and we weren't even in their district. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the recycling. A couple of days later, Karen Lander knocked on our door. Dressed in a white pantsuit and a smile that felt more like a threat, she introduced herself as the HOA president. At first I thought she was just trying to be friendly, until she mentioned the dues. I told her, calmly but firmly, that our house wasn't part of the HOA. She didn't care. In fact, she seemed to take it as an insult. That's when she made it clear. "It's only fair that you contribute your share," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. It started with a letter, the first of many. The tone was polite, almost too polite, as if Karen thought the sweetness of her words could mask the venom beneath. The notice was about my delinquent dues, a reminder to settle the $450 I owed. It wasn't a mistake, it was intentional, and it wasn't going to be the last time. I ignored it. I had to. This wasn't my problem, and it certainly wasn't something I was going to entertain. But 2 days later, another letter arrived, this time marked Notice of Violation. It was for a patch of dandelions near my fence. Dandelions. I took a picture of the notice and laughed, shaking my head. Was this a joke? Gina wasn't laughing. She wasn't even smiling. "You have to deal with this," she said, her voice steady but concerned. "She's not going to stop." I tossed the letter in the trash. But that wasn't the end. A third letter showed up the following week. This time, it was about my welcome mat. Apparently, it wasn't up to aesthetic standards. "Violation of Section 12B of the Longwood Estates Guidelines," it read. I stared at it for a while. This was turning into something more serious. A pattern had formed, and it wasn't going to be about dandelions or a welcome mat. This was her declaring war. I was sitting in the living room, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when I saw them. Two men in navy blue polo shirts with the familiar oak tree logo on their chest standing on my front lawn. One had a clipboard, the other was holding a measuring tape stretched out across my driveway. They weren't on my property line. They were on my property. I walked outside, trying to stay calm. "Can I help you guys?" I called out. The thicker of the two, the one with a shaved head, barely looked up. "Just doing our job," he muttered. "Job?" I repeated, crossing my arms. "On my property?" "Yeah," the lanky guy said, looking at me like I was the one in the wrong. "We're with the HOA Compliance Committee. We're checking for code violations." I could feel my pulse rising. "Code violations?" I said, incredulous. "You're not code enforcement, and you don't belong on my property. What do you think you're doing?" He gestured vaguely to the street. "We've been asked to check the property for violations. Your mailbox is too far from the curb. It violates Section 4, Paragraph C of the HOA guidelines." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You've got to be kidding me. I'm not even part of your HOA. Get off my lawn." They just stared at me for a moment, clearly expecting me to back down. But I wasn't. Not anymore. "You're trespassing. And if you don't leave, I'll be calling the police." That was when they finally moved, slowly, reluctantly, but not before throwing one last look at me. It was like they knew I had crossed the line in a way I couldn't undo. The next day, the damage started. My truck was blocked in the driveway. No, not blocked. In front of my truck, there was a big, bright orange sticker plastered to my windshield. It was from the HOA, listing a violation of HOA parking regulations and demanding I pay a fine of $75 within 10 days. I couldn't believe it. They were using anything they could to make me pay up. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the sticker, making sure to capture the violation notice in full view. It was all I needed to show I wasn't the one in the wrong. As I took the photo, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Two more figures in navy blue shirts stood on my sidewalk, watching me. I knew what this was about. Intimidation. They were trying to make sure I knew I was being watched. Later that day, Karen's tactics grew more personal. I received another letter, this one labeled Final Warning. The amount owed had doubled, and this time it came with an official-sounding legal threat. They were threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay immediately. A lien. The nerve. I called Gina. "We need to do something. This is insane." "We will," she replied. "I'm not going to let her ruin everything we've worked for." I had had enough. I filed a report with the sheriff's office about the repeated harassment and trespassing. But instead of dealing with Karen, it was me they sent an officer to talk to. Apparently, she had filed a complaint saying I was violating HOA codes again. The officer showed up, wrote down my statement, and left, telling me the situation would be handled. But something wasn't right. This wasn't just about rules anymore. This was about control. And then came the next surprise. A sheriff's deputy arrived unannounced one Saturday afternoon, telling me Karen had made a complaint about an unpermitted structure on my property. A structure. I was confused. "I don't have any structures on my property," I said. "Apparently you do," the officer replied, showing me an email from Karen. She had claimed I had illegally constructed a shed without permission. The deputy didn't seem convinced, but I knew what was happening. Karen was manipulating the system. "I'll be fine," I said. "But she's not getting away with this. Not this time." Karen went too far. One afternoon, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw it. A golf cart blocking my driveway. It had the same bright, flashing yellow light, the same Longwood security label slapped across the side. Sitting in the driver's seat was the same guy, thick neck, the one who had been measuring my mailbox. I honked, thinking it was some kind of mistake. But he didn't move. He just looked at me in the rearview mirror, his expression smug. I honked again. Nothing. I got out of my truck, already feeling the anger building. "Move your cart," I said, as calmly as I could manage. "Ma'am's orders," Thickneck muttered, his chest puffed out. "This is my driveway," I said. "You're blocking it." And then he shoved me. Not hard, but enough to cross a line, enough to make my hands curl into fists. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. "Don't touch me," I said, stepping back. But he shoved me again, his eyes challenging me to do something. Just then, I heard the front door open. Gina stood there, phone to her ear. "Yes, 911? There's a man blocking our driveway and refusing to leave. He's just physically assaulted my husband." That was when Thickneck's tough guy act collapsed. Within minutes, the police arrived. The officer immediately identified Thickneck as a trespasser and instructed him to leave. Karen had gone too far, and now the authorities were involved. But the real game changer came after that. This wasn't just harassment anymore. Karen was about to learn she couldn't control everything. We had reached the point of no return. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors from Longwood Estates filled the seats, their faces tense with anticipation. The air was thick with suspense as Karen Lander, sitting across from me, tried to maintain her composure, her designer lawyer at her side. She glanced at the gallery occasionally, sneering at the people she'd terrorized for years. She thought this was her moment, her victory. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Judge Martinez, called the hearing to order. His voice was calm, but every word was deliberate. "Mr. Drummer, the floor is yours." I stepped up to the podium, heart pounding, but my resolve was unshakable. I wasn't a lawyer, but I didn't need to be. I had something far more powerful: truth and evidence. I looked at the judge, then at Karen, and began my presentation. "Your Honor, the Longwood Estates HOA does not have any legal standing. It hasn't existed for years," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I'm not part of it. The evidence speaks for itself." Karen's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The map is just a guideline." But the judge raised his hand, silencing him. "You'll get your chance, Counselor," Judge Martinez said. "Let him continue." I turned on the projector, displaying the county plat map on the screen. "This is the official map of Longwood Estates," I said, pointing to the area where my property was clearly marked outside the HOA's boundaries. "My lot, number 24, is not part of this subdivision." I looked at Karen's lawyer, who had already started sweating. "Can you point to my lot on the map?" I asked, my voice calm. The lawyer mumbled something about outdated records, but the judge cut him off. "Simple question," Judge Martinez said. "Is his lot on this map?" "No, Your Honor," the lawyer admitted, clearly flustered. "Thank you," I said, feeling the tension in the room shift in my favor. "Next, Your Honor." I moved to the next piece of evidence, the Secretary of State's dissolution notice, which clearly showed that Longwood Estates HOA had been administratively dissolved 3 years ago. I displayed the red inactive stamp. "This is the corporate filing for Longwood Estates," I explained. "The HOA was dissolved for failure to file its annual reports. As of 3 years ago, it ceased to exist. So, how can it possibly collect dues from me or anyone else?" Karen's lawyer was speechless. But Karen, her face turning a deep shade of red, shot up from her seat. "This is outrageous!" she shrieked, pointing at me. "This is all lies!" Karen's outburst only seemed to fuel the judge's determination. "Miss Lander," Judge Martinez said, his voice turning cold, "you will remain silent or I'll have the bailiff assist you." Karen snapped her mouth shut, but her eyes were blazing with rage. It was as if the room had gotten 10 degrees hotter. The gallery, which had been silent up until then, started murmuring. They'd been watching this nightmare unfold for years, and now they could see the end of it. They were waiting for justice to come crashing down. I pulled out the next piece of evidence, bank statements showing regular, substantial payments from HOA dues, payments that went directly to Karen's company, Lander Landscape and Beautification, LLC. As you can see, Your Honor, Karen Lander has been using her position to funnel money from the residents into her own pocket for services that, frankly, don't even exist. Karen's lawyer scrambled, But the judge wasn't having it. "How do you explain these payments, Miss Lander?" he asked, staring at her with contempt. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was caught. The floodgates had opened, and her carefully constructed empire was crumbling. The judge continued, his voice growing in intensity. "And now, let's talk about the fraudulent liens," he said, showing the court a stack of documents. "Fake liens filed against the homes of my neighbors for unpaid dues that were never owed. This is extortion. This is criminal." Karen was visibly shaking now. "This is a mistake," she mumbled, but no one was buying it anymore. "This whole thing is rigged. This is a scam," she screamed, pointing at the judge. The courtroom gasped as Judge Martinez, in his calm, measured tone, declared, "Miss Lander, you are being referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation into fraud, extortion, and filing false documents. You are under arrest for your actions, and this court has ordered the dissolution of the Longwood Estates, HOA." The crowd erupted into applause. My neighbors, the same ones Karen had terrorized for years, were clapping and cheering. The weight of everything, the lies, the manipulation, the fear, was lifted from all of us in that single moment. Karen Lander, the woman who had lorded over this neighborhood with her petty rules and fraudulent power, was finished. The next few days felt surreal. The weight of the courtroom victory hung in the air like the end of a long storm. The tension that had gripped Longwood Estates for years was finally gone, and it felt like we could breathe again. Gina and I sat on the porch, a cold beer in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Buster, our dog, lay at our feet, blissfully unaware of the battle that had raged for so long. It was quiet now, the neighborhood no longer on edge, and there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. From across the street, Bob and Carol waved as they reinstalled their basketball hoop, the same one Karen had once threatened to remove. Their son was already shooting hoops, the sound of the ball bouncing off the pavement a familiar and welcome noise. It was small, but it was a sign. Our neighborhood was coming back to life. Down the street, Mr. Henderson had replaced his faded HOA-approved wind chimes with a bright set that jingled in the wind, the sound of freedom filling the air. The neighbors, once afraid to speak out, were now sharing smiles, nods, and waves as they walked by. The change was immediate, almost electric. The oppressive shadow of Karen's reign had finally lifted, and we could all start living again. The aftermath wasn't just emotional, it was legal. The court ruling was a bombshell, and the aftermath was swift. The Longwood Estates HOA was officially dissolved, its assets seized, and any illegal liens filed in the last 3 years were deemed void. The district attorney's office began a full criminal investigation into Karen Lander's actions. The very next day, a news crew showed up to interview me about the victory. It felt strange to be on the other side of the story, but it was satisfying. As for Karen, she didn't get off easy. Not only was she banned from ever holding a position within any HOA again, but she also faced a fine of $5,000 for her frivolous lawsuit. And that was just the beginning. The money she had funneled into her landscaping company was being returned to the residents of Longwood Estates, and a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances was underway. But the real kicker? Karen had to personally pay for my court costs, as ordered by the judge. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was symbolic. It was the court's way of showing that her abuse of power had consequences. The damage she had done to so many lives wasn't just erased. It was acknowledged, and now she had to pay for it. The best part of it all? Watching Karen's life fall apart in real time. Within a few weeks, the house she had so carefully curated went up for sale. It wasn't just the house she lost. It was everything she'd built her life on. The facade of being the powerful HOA president had shattered, and with it, her reputation. I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. It wasn't just about the money or the victory in court. It was about taking down someone who thought they could control everyone else, someone who never considered that the little guy might just win. As for the neighborhood, it was transformed. We threw a block party a week later. People came from all corners of Longwood Estates, each person carrying a little more pride in their step, a little more confidence in their smile. The days of fear and intimidation were over. Bob's neon green shutters were the talk of the party. Every time someone walked by, they made a comment about them. Some laughed, Some shook their heads, but everyone admired Bob's boldness. The streets were filled with people who had found their voices again, who had reclaimed their homes from the clutches of a corrupt system. The winds of change were blowing, and Longwood Estates was a different place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the street in a soft golden glow, Gina and I sat back on our porch swing, a sense of peace settling over us. It had been a long, hard fight, but it had been worth it. We had fought for our home, our freedom, and our future, and we had won. Gina leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I think we're going to be okay now." I smiled, taking a sip of my beer. "Yeah," I said, "I think we are." Just then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was Bob, standing proudly in front of his house, hands on his hips, admiring his work. His shutters glowed in the fading light, a beacon of victory for everyone who had been oppressed by Karen's reign. "I'll say it," I said, grinning at Gina. "Bob's shutters are definitely a violation of some sort of city code." She laughed, smacking my arm playfully. "Don't you dare," she warned, still chuckling. I leaned back, enjoying the last few moments of the evening. We had fought for our peace, and now we had it. The war was over, and Longwood Estates was free.